were coming across England, Wales and Sunday. So I'm thanking all of our flights.
Listening to today. You're just in their Friday the 27th. The headlines this time out. It started with his first speech. The government is thinking ahead about changes to non-bond tax statements, like warnings that they might not raise the mortgage rate. Pressure is growing. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will agree to a ceasefire. Keir Starmer, his first speech to the General Assembly, added his voice to the calls for immediate talks with authorities, responding both sides step back from the plan. Mr. Netanyahu addresses the Assembly later today, but has already rejected a call for a truce. From New York, our WMUZ correspondent James Adler sent this report.
An international call for a 3-week ceasefire may have been rejected by a flurry of Israeli politicians, but Western allies have not given up. In his first speech to the UN General Assembly, Keir Starmer called on both Israel and Hezbollah to stop the violence and create space for a diplomatic settlement. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Israeli ministers and emphasized how further escalation would make it more difficult to allow civilians on both sides of the Lebanese border to return home. Benjamin Netanyahu issued an worrying statement saying that he appreciated US efforts to help Israeli citizens and noted there had been a lot of misreporting about the ceasefire initiative. Israel's Prime Minister will himself address the UN today, much in the Penguin's words.
After the Prime Minister spoke, Lebanon's Foreign Minister made an impassioned plea for reports of the crisis. He said the country's very existence would be at risk if the conflict were allowed to continue. Hugo Bashir reports from Beirut.
Rejecting calls for de-escalation, Israel says it will continue to target Hezbollah in an offensive that has already killed hundreds across Lebanon and forced tens of thousands from their homes. Amid mounting pressure on hospitals and a growing number of displaced residents, the Lebanese authorities are appealing for an immediate ceasefire. At the United Nations, the Foreign Minister, Abdallah bin Habib, said that his country was during the crisis threatening its very existence and that it was urgent to stop it before it became impossible to be contained. Hezbollah has also indicated it is not willing to back down and continues to fire rockets at Israel. Overnight, the Israeli military said it had intercepted a missile that had been launched by the Houthis in Yemen. Like Hezbollah, they are also supported by Iran.
The Prime Minister has had a two-hour with Donald Trump. Keir Starmer visited Trump Tower last night after his address to the UN. Keir, who was joined at the music by Foreign Secretary David Lammy, is now flying back to the UK. Political editor Chris Mason is travelling with him and sent this report from the plane.
This was the first time Sir Keir Starmer had met Donald Trump. Beforehand, the Prime Minister told us it was important to establish a relationship between the two of us. Also claims that Mr. Trump had said, I actually think it's very nice. The race is very early, it's very important. Alongside Sir Keir at the meeting, Foreign Secretary David Lammy once described his host as a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath and a tyrant in a two-hand. Prime Minister has also never met Donald Trump's Democratic rival, the Vice President Kamala Harris, who was in Washington yesterday. So Keir said he would like to speak to her, but there had been unusual direct challenges.
President Zelensky of Ukraine announced his plans for victory against Russia in a meeting with Joe Biden at the White House. Mr. Biden pledged more military aid. Later, then met the US Vice President, President Kamala Harris, and insisted it was vital to stand up to the Russian leader. Mr. Zelensky will meet Donald Trump today. The Treasury is reconsidering Labour's manifesto plan to further tighten rules on non-dollar tax status, which was scrapped by the last Conservative government. BBC News understands there are concerns about how much money would be raised if wealthy foreigners left the UK. Money has been earmarked for the NHS and school breakfast clubs. Non-John, President, whose permanent home of Johnson for tax purposes is outside Britain. Editor Fuzzy Islam.
Concessions made when Jeremy Hunt expected to scrap the London scheme in March. Design
trying to reduce the incentive for urban farmers on their to impact. About half the Labour Ministry wide coalition plan was already forecast to be lost to changes in behaviour. The rate of assessed by APR and indicated highly uncertain. Certain changes to subsidies without immigration, for example, could mean the plan additional tightening of the plan with rates early final decisions have been made. Some will think that the first decision to apply immigration tax to excise a discount on premium farm electricity is being considered. Treasurers adamant that non-farm sectors will be scrapped. Any further changes to the regime budget should consider to increase them.
The charity Age Youth says there has been a significant increase in the number of older people in England struggling to meet the level of social help they need. It says cuts to digital services and NHS pressures mean that about 2 million people aged 65 and over are not getting enough help with day-to-day tasks. The government says it is also proposing a high-quality national health service. As a social affairs editor, Alison Wood.
Age UK's analysis, which is based on the latest health and care data in England, says the number of people over the age of 75 has increased by 18% since 2017. Yet fewer people get social care from councils now. It estimates that about 2 million people aged 65 plus don't get enough help with daily tasks like washing, dressing and going to the bathroom. Significantly more than the 1.6 million who had unmet care needs when they did this calculation in 2023. The report says ongoing cuts to council care and shortages of GPs and community nurses make it difficult to get early help, leading more older people to end up in hospital.
The new leader of the Scottish Conservative Party is not in Edinburgh. Champion stood against Justice Professor Russell Finlay, alongside the Minister Roger Fraser, and former Deputy Leader William Gallagher. A powerful storm behind the Helene began from northern Florida with winds of up to 140 miles an hour. Officials say wind winds are underwater, and under a storm surge high enough to swamp a two-story building. The state governor, Ron DeSantis, said one person had already been hurt by a falling roadside, and there was likely more across their roads. Speaking at the news conference, Mr. DeSantis gave this update.
You need to be right now, just not really there. Now it's not the time to be going out. Not only do people see it in landfall here in you're still seeing a surge in water rising in parts of Florida far south from the Big Bend area.
The widow of the broadcaster Dr. Michael Roosevelt accepted an award with his own affairs at the Institute of Review. Died in June and involved in a reproductive singing. Dr. Michael Mosley told the British Podcast Awards he'd spent many happy hours recording it in wishes, coffee and sound effects. And now they present the sound.
Consider ways to provide just one thing began in 2021. And over 3 years explored a range of health tools, benefits of bombshells, technology instruments can boost your immune. In one of her first public appearances since his death, Dr. Claire Ravenhurst accepted the was on behalf of her husband, saying it would have made a great doctor. She thanked people for messages, letters, outpouring love the family received since his death. Being single one in 12 of the 28 categories, including Best Track Crime and Best Documentary for journalist Georgia Dunbar's Blood on the Dance Floor.
Coldplay have been named this century's most played British band. Music massive PPL uses data from radio and television, but also restaurants, offices and gyms. Since the Coldplay songs were played 40,000 more times than their closest rival, England.
Thank you. My name is Paul Simmons, the kind Donald Trump and Keir Starr. I'm not a marriage made by everyone might think that the two had dinner at times, secure, partnership for example, and English two-way. Here's what Mr. Trump had to say shortly before the meeting.
Well, I'm going to see him in about an hour, so happy nights, right? But I actually think he's very nice. I think he had a great race, very well. It's very early, but he's popular, and I'll be seeing him, and I'll send him great cards.
Let's talk about all of this to before our shadow foreign secretary and all
actively taking part, taking place, as well as everything to as well. Good morning to you. Would you taking part in the meeting like this?
Donald Trump may be the President of the United States in a couple of months' time, so of course it's important to have meetings with him and to build a relationship with him. Whatever criticisms that we may have of Donald Trump, the fact is that the office of President is one that gets completely respected and
How blunt would you like to see that behind the scenes?
I think that this is an initial meeting, so there needs to be a certain amount of relationship with them, and I do think that if there are things that President Johnson says that there is a relationship with them.
Yes, and you were very critical of the government in 2019 when Theresa May was spending time.
He has tried to create borders with Muslim majority countries. He is to small Mexican country. He has grabbed women and boasted about it. He is a sexual predator. He is a racist, and it's right to say that. And I think we need to think about when is it that our country got so scared? Why can't we start thinking things as they are?
What stage do you think this thing should start to say these things?
We are actually in a really strong position in that if you think about all the other G7 countries, we are a country that we just have an election. We have a progressive government, a large majority, and stability in Congress. A good 5 years of the same leader. If you look at the other G7 countries, they don't necessarily have that. And I think that hearing Keir Starmer come to the UN General Assembly and say we want to be friends, we want to work multilaterally. No, but I mean, so
That's the point, because all of what you've just said is interesting about the stability of this government and the fact that he is in the position he is in. Not a lot of Labour people who wonder whether or not this provides an opportunity to be really blunt about what you could do.
I don't think there is any need to go in the first meeting with Donald Trump.
Well, which meeting should it happen?
Well, whenever anything comes. So if he's president and he starts caging Mexican children, then that needs to be called out. If he, I mean, so
Does it need to be called a racist?
well, it depends how he is behaving. I mean, he seems to he stands it out somewhat, doesn't he? These allegations. I mean, to me, since I'm just a few weeks ago. But
Well, he's still saying things that you said were racist. You still think it's racist?
yes, and if I was at dinner with someone who said things like that, then I would call it out. I don't imagine that the conversation moved on to things like that at that dinner. But you know, if and when it occurs, it needs to be done.
Turning to Levy, we say things about Levy, and Keir Starmer has been in the forefront of saying things about it, but he's certainly not the only leader to say them at the UN General Assembly about the need for peace, about the need specifically for a 21-day ceasefire. Is there anything we can do?
Yes, there's lots we can do. So as I say, I think that we need to be aware that we have perhaps more clout than we have time recently, and I think we're in a fairly unique position. So it isn't to, I think that we're in a position to be able to get it together. I think that the UN General Assembly meeting at this time means that I think that many other nations can be pulled behind the declaration that has been made, and that will make it stronger. We don't know whether or not Israel is bluffing about a ground war. We do know that in 2006 that they got very bogged down, that at the moment they may be ahead because they're using air power and supplies, but a ground war may well be different. And actually, the poor Lebanese who, many of whom do not want Hezbollah in the bottom of their country, certainly don't want to have the Israelis, and Hezbollah may well end up with no legitimacy as a result of that ground
But
war.
is there a deal? Must a deal insist this time around that the UN resolutions that the part of any are actually on the site because they weren't last time.
Well, so they have been to a certain extent. I mean, so 1701 is the one that we talked about. It's that they've been relocated to in 2006. And 1701 basically has a buffer zone of 18 miles where the UN and Lebanese forces are supposed to be. In the meantime, poor Lebanon has gone through the most terrible economic crisis. They had an explosion. They've got more people per head by refugee status than any other country in the world. So Lebanon needs our support. There have been things that we've done in the past. So on the eastern border, for example, there were watchtowers put up in Britain. We actually dismantled them from Northern Ireland and moved them to Lebanon and put them up there as well. Over the summer, Britain made an offer to put up more watchtowers on the southern border. There are things like that that we can do in order to help Lebanon take its place on its southern border with the United Nations and be able to hire both sides who are frankly able to come over to the border.
And they've already Congress, Foreign Affairs, statement to contact.
We know we've experienced these radio strikes. This has already been a war. At least it would have felt like one. We know that among the hundreds killed and the thousands injured in the last 10 days, there are women, children, and elderly people. This is the account of a woman called Khulud Salman, who spoke to the BBC's radio after she had to leave her home in the south of Lebanon. She is 47 and has 4 children.
The day we fled our home, the situation was very difficult and frightening. When we got out of the cars, the Israeli bombardment hit the heart of the village. The shells fell all around us. We went to the next village. They bombed the building and destroyed it. We decided to go to Saida. We got there and bombs hit us. We were in pain. The people of the south are in pain. We can't take it anymore. I saw a young man carrying a child without a leg.
Were you afraid that you might be killed on the journey?
Yes, we were scared. We had children and we were sick. There were 30 of us in 2 cars. We were scared. The planes were bombing us. We thought protect us.
And although our senior international correspondent is now from Tar on the Lebanese coast, only about 30 kilometres from the Israeli border, how typical is that route for what we know from there?
It's what's been going on this week, Michelle, since Monday, since the major intensification by Israel. There have been wave after wave of airstrikes, not only here in the south, but also in the east, in the Bekaa Valley, and in some areas further to the north. And it's actually quite difficult for the emergency services and the Lebanese authorities and the media to keep track of how many strikes there are, because they happen sometimes in areas that are remote and hard to reach. Some of them we can hear and see, some of them we discover later on. The authorities are struggling to keep up and to maintain daily information like the death toll. But for example, for yesterday and overnight, Lebanon is saying that it's now another 101 people who have been killed. We've had at least 700 so far earlier in the week, so we could possibly be at around 800 killed now just since Monday. And the numbers of those who are being forced to flee are continuing to rise. The foreign minister said yesterday there could be almost 500,000 people who have been displaced in Lebanon due to this war this week. And really war is what it is, even if the word is not being used by Israel or by Hezbollah.
Is Hezbollah an obvious presence in the area?
It varies a lot, Michelle, from place to place. I mean, in general, in the south, Hezbollah has strong support and a continuous presence. This is really part of its heartland. So what happens when you drive into villages and drive into areas, you will often see the Hezbollah flag. You will see pictures along the road of people who are considered to be martyrs. They are Hezbollah fighters who perhaps were killed in the last few months, or indeed people who have been killed in previous years fighting against Israel or fighting against Syria. But how Hezbollah manifests its control, particularly now, is in terms of access to areas where strikes have happened. So we have had 2 instances in the past few days where we rushed to the location of where we knew there had been an Israeli strike.
in order to try and check what happened to that sort of information. And in both cases, within literally seconds of our arrival, Hezbollah appeared around us. Now, there had been no sign that they were there, nobody was visible on the street. But the minute they saw phone reporters and TV camera around us, in the first instance they told us that we couldn't film, we had to leave the area. In the second instance they confiscated our footage and indeed our camera, and we had to negotiate to get it back. So in the areas where they are present, their control is pretty much total. That doesn't mean that everybody supports them, and there would be pockets here, for example, Christian villages in some Sunni areas where people are strongly opposed to Hezbollah, but it is also the case that it can be difficult for people to voice those kind of objections. They feel it is better to try and keep quiet about that. But also true to say, Michelle, that even this week, even as Israel has been bombing as heavily as it has, and with the death and injury of many civilians, a lot of people who will tell you they still support Hezbollah, who they refer to as the resistance. And that includes one man who the other day was burying his daughter who was killed in an airstrike, and he came out from the ceremony and said, Hassan Nasrallah, my soul is yours. So they maintain strong support.
Continue ramping up this morning about the future of Thames Water. Two major ratings agencies are now downgrading its debt. This is back up more about it.
Both Moody's and S&P have put Thames Water's debt even further into triple C territory, meaning it's considered highly risky and prone to default. This, of course, follows Thames Water's statement last week that the company will run out of money in December if nothing changes. Luke Hickmore is an investment director at Aberdeen, which represents some of Thames Water's creditors. Luke, good morning. Another downgrade, not much optimism either. Both ratings agencies have a pretty gloomy outlook. Do you?
I think from the way they're coming at this, we are going to see Thames go through a technical default, because it needs to restructure, it needs to attract equity investment, and to do that, they need to go through a period of restructuring. We want that to happen in public rather than through a special administrative regime through the government. And I think hopefully we'll get there at some point this year.
Does the statement of nationalisation more likely? And what would that mean for infrastructure investment in Europe?
I don't think it does, actually. I don't think that changes in terms of the probabilities at all. As I said, I think a market-led solution is our preferred choice, and I think most investors intend preferred choice, and the governments, I suspect. That's affected infrastructure into the UK. It's a massive problem. If you have to think about Thames as a case study, how do you cope with climate change? How do you cope with regulation? How do you get the 88 billion that we need into UK water over the next 5 years? A lot of that stuff comes from overseas, and at the moment, they're very nervous about investing into the UK.
Investors might be nervous, but consumers should know that an awful lot of spokespersons and safeguards are in place to ensure that services to customers are protected, regardless of issues faced by shareholders of Thames Water. What does it mean for creditors and the money that they've lent?
So it means we've got to continually consider our position, how Thames are going to pay us back and when that's going to happen, and how we can help them get to a better place over the next few months. But they won't have enough cash by the end of December. We will get into the new year with Thames still existing in the form it is. And as you say, it's not going to affect consumers, but it is important because it does come back to that being international investors coming into the UK to help support infrastructure investment in all sorts of areas of the UK, not just water.
The Thames Water spokesperson told us the company will continue to engage with creditors to consider options for the extension of our liquidity runway. In a sentence, can they find the money that we need to do?
I think so, but you can never be 100% sure, I'm afraid.
So that happens that Luke Hickmore, Investment Director at Aberdeen. Thank you very much. Thank you for this 24 minutes past 7. 63 flood warnings were in place this morning in England. Counties from Worcestershire to Northamptonshire and Cambridgeshire were affected. More than 100 flood alerts too. Caroline Douglas from the Environment Agency, Executive Director for Flood and Coastal Erosion, has just been talking to me, explaining first whether the extent of this was unusual.
in terms of the actual rainfall we've seen, it is unusual to be this early in the winter in some ways, but it is also the end of summer. We have seen increased rainfall, heavy rainfall through the summer period, and this is a bit of a switch between summer into more traditional winter rainfall. We're going to be seeing that towards the end of the week. So we've seen over the last sort of week or so, we've seen heavy thunderstorms and downpours which have saturated particular areas. And then as we move over the weekend and into next week, we'll see more traditional winter rainfall that's more widespread, and unfortunately that's already been landing on already saturated ground.
And which areas are the worst affected, where you have the most concern about how people are being affected?
The Midlands are looking to be the most affected. In terms of the Western Midlands, they're of concern to us because rivers are rising, the water is making its way into those watercourses, and so we will be seeing rising river levels in those areas. There's also some areas that were affected earlier in the week, like the River Nene, and people we've heard about Billings Aquadrome. So we're still keeping a watching brief on that.
Would you rather people didn't get on the road unless they really have to this morning in some of these areas, the West Midlands in particular?
There will be a lot of water on the roads, so people really do need to listen to advice about road closures, take care, and certainly don't take a risk and drive through floodwater, because it only takes 30 centimetres to float your car. And also really advising people around over the weekend walking near rivers or watercourses to not go near them, keep their pets and children away as well, because water will be fast flowing and very dangerous.
It only takes 30 centimetres of water to float your car. That is really extraordinary. So it's the kind of level of water which many people think, well, it's barely the height of my tyres, I can drive through that.
That's exactly right. So it's sort of about halfway up your shin, just about half the height of the tyres. It's not much at all.
And do you think people often underestimate that, and that's why we see some of the problems in really desperate situations that we do in this situation?
They do underestimate. They think the car's a big object and it's a very heavy object and hard to do, but 30 centimetres is not much water, and also many of these waterways are much more fast flowing than people will realise, and it really doesn't take much to make a vehicle float, and so in that case it will be swept away, and we really don't want to see the sorts of tragic circumstances we've seen this year and in previous years as well.
Caroline Douglas from the Environment Agency. Thanks very much.
27 minutes past 7 to the sporting side.
Thank you, Justin. Let's start with a parade of impressive victories for British football teams in Europe. 10-man Tottenham beat Azerbaijani side Karabakh 3-0 in the Europa League, while Rangers were 2-0 winners at Malmo. Celtic are the first Scottish side to qualify for the Women's Champions League group stage after a 3-0 aggregate victory over the Ukrainian side Vorskla Poltava. Arsenal overturned a 1-0 first leg deficit to beat Swedish side Häcken 4-1 on aggregate, while Manchester City picked up an 8-0 aggregate win over Paris FC. The draw for the group stages takes place at 12:30 today. In cricket, pace bowler Josh Hartle has been ruled out of England's tour of Pakistan with a quad injury. Excuse me. And it is the fourth one-day international between England and Australia at Lord's later with the tourists 2-1 up. We're joined by our cricket correspondent Henry Moran now. Good morning, Henry.
Good morning.
England may be 2-1 down, but they do head to the home of cricket with the wind in their sails, don't they, as they look to set up a decider in Bristol on Sunday.
They do, yeah. That performance at Chester Street in the third one-day international, just so much better than what we'd seen in the first couple of matches. If we focus on standing captain Harry Brook in particular, I think he's had quite a tumultuous time of it. He faced a lot of criticism for his comments after the first game of the series, a perceived lack of care for how the players were getting out, and he clarified what he meant in those comments prior to the last game with his words, and then on the field showed just such tenacity in that 155-run partnership with Will Jackson on his way to his own score of 110 not out. It's a win that broke a run of 14 consecutive wins for Australia, the world champions, and it gives England today a chance to level the series going into Sunday's final match of the summer at Bristol.
Now, it's a sellout at the home of cricket, but there is a bit of a growing controversy about ticket prices, with England player turned broadcaster and columnist David Lloyd writing a damning article I read this morning saying that it beggars belief that ticket prices will be £175 next Sunday's between England and immediately after the Test cricket, which becoming ever more elitist. What's your take?
This issue was really highlighted this summer. Fourth day of that Sri Lanka Test match, just 9,000 fans were in at Lord's. Questions about whether Test cricket was becoming inaccessible to, I think, let's be honest, most cricket fans. Now, Lord's is more expensive than other venues. There were days that Test crickets tend to be tube anywhere, and Lord's would make that point. Next year, Lord's will sell out. It's an India Test match, the demand for tickets will be huge. The issue is perhaps a wider, game-wide one. So you look back to earlier in the summer, Lord's was jam-packed. The finals of the 100 tickets were a fraction of the price. If the governing body wants to see short-form cricket up is a gateway to enjoying longer forms of the game, well, you can very easily argue that the longer forms then have to be affordable for those new fans to come in and enjoy.
Very quickly now, Henry, it can feel like an England-Australia encounter at the end of September lacks edge, but there is always a bit of leader when these sides meet, particularly Lord's, isn't there? Just quickly.
Yeah, it's always a special occasion. You mentioned that edge, of course. This is the return for the Australia side with that famous Johnny Bairstow run out by Alex Carey last summer in the Ashes. Booze in the long room on that occasion. Don't think it'd be quite like that today, you imagine. But England-Australia at Lord's, series on the line.
Thank you, Henry. And there will be full commentary with potentially decisive fourth ODI on Test Match Special and highlights on BBC Two.
Simon, thank you.
This cultural life, where my guests reveal their most important influences and inspirations.
You have to just play this to the best of my ability.
Dame Judi Dench,
With everybody else in the cast, with further recipes.
Paul McCartney,
He left school at 14, but he was very interested in words.
Whoopi Goldberg, and many more.
The act of having access to my imagination is the thing that got me going.
This cultural life with me, John Wilson. Listen on BBC Sounds.
And that was 28 years. I think there was no two very franchise investing against the other.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been urged to agree to a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah. Keir Starmer, in his first speech to the United Nations General Assembly, added to the calls for an immediate pause in the fighting, saying it was vital both sides step back from the brink. Mr. Netanyahu is due to address the UN later today. The Prime Minister has had a 2-hour dinner with Donald Trump in New York. It's the first time he's met the Republican presidential nominee. Security visited Trump Tower last night after saying he wanted to establish a relationship with Mr. Trump. The Treasury is reconsidering Labour's manifesto plan to further tighten rules on non-dom tax status, which was scrapped by the previous government. BBC News understands there are concerns about how much money would be raised if wealthy foreigners left the UK. Non-dom defines a UK resident whose permanent home or domicile for tax purposes is outside Britain. Treasury officials say the non-dom status will still be scrapped. Hurricane Helene is battering northern Florida. State authorities have warned of catastrophic conditions and say one person has already died. The charity says there's been a significant increase in the number of older people in England struggling to get the level of social care they need. Age UK said cuts to council services and NHS pressures mean about 2 million people aged 65 and over are not getting enough help with day-to-day tasks. The report says social care has been put under pressure by funding cuts, long NHS waiting lists and staff shortages. The government says it is committed to creating a high-quality national care service. A year to the day since the Sycamore Gap tree in Northumberland was felled, the National Trust is offering communities across the UK a chance to request 49 of its saplings. Some have already been promised to sites. One will be placed near Bristol, memory of a boy who died of cancer. Another will go to a nature sanctuary in County Durham, created to help mothers with addictions.
Thank you. 27 minutes to 8. Oops. Could it be that further efforts to reduce the tax advantages of this non-dom tax status might actually raise revenue money largely because the federal effect is and if that is the case, is there a bigger black hole in public finances that has to be filled by someone else? A few moments ago, we hear from Nabil Sahrawi, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer. But first, let's turn to Faisalist and economics editor. I suppose two questions, Faisal. What do we understand about what the tweaks are that the government agrees is considering to what she wants to do about non-dom status? Number two, does that mean a larger black hole?
Just a bit of background is helpful here. There's long-standing Labour policy to scrap the non-dom status, replace it with residency policy and enacting it. In the Labour manifesto, there was a further tightening of the concessions given by Jeremy Hunt on inheritance tax applied to trust, a discount on bringing foreign income next year. And Labour said that they could raise £1 billion and put that towards breakfast clubs in schools and extra appointments for doctors and hospitals. It's that part of it that's been considered by the Treasury now. And the original costing that naturally raised by the overall policy was always highly uncertain and dependent on the incentive behavioural assumptions, essentially the incentive action. And we don't really know how that would work or function, but those concessions were designed to limit that incentive. And so some of the internal work we understand and the internal work being done is about that incentive, and that there are versions of the policy that if enacted increase the incentive and therefore lead to the further time and not raising much money. So this is what this is about. It's being considered right now. The overall policy is still will happen, but this tightening, how it's enacted, its phasing in, that is what's being considered right now, and there's some recognition that this is changed.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Faisal. Let's turn to Nimesh Shah, who's on the line, who's the CEO of Philip Rothenberg, which is the accountancy firm that works with the taxes of billionaires. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Justin.
Are people leaving?
Yeah, but sure that yes, some people have left on the back of the spring budget from Jeremy Hunt. There was another statement then by the then Labour opposition back in April, which suggested some of the tightening of the rules that Faisal has just talked about. And that felt, non-doms felt that the right of removing the taxes that they would need to pay in the UK. That meant that a number of people decided to leave the UK over the summer, but I think the bigger majority, in my experience, just has been that a number of people are planning to leave over the next 12 to 18 months. Practically, it's difficult to leave a country. There's schooling of children, there's jobs, there's businesses, housing, these things do take time, and so people will take a bit of time around where to go.
I suppose the crucial question is whether those tweaks that Faisal was talking about, particularly with whether you set up a trust and hand it on to your kids, etc., without paying tax in Britain, whether that is enough, in your view, to keep more of these people here, and in other words, to keep some of the benefits of climbing up non-dom status and the financial benefits of the Treasury in place.
Well, I think the first thing is just a lot of damage has been done by the yo-yo non-dom tax policy, and just taxes in general. There is a cloud hanging over the UK in terms of what taxes may come about in the autumn budget, but maybe that's a slightly separate story. The concessions that Jeremy Hunt made were designed to soften the blow. There was this cliff edge happening, the non-dom rules were going away, so there was almost a gradual phasing of introducing worldwide taxation to non-doms, and in particular inheritance tax. That was the issue that was on the minds. A 40% sledgehammer on inheritance tax is the biggest issue here, and the fact that the Labour policy was to introduce inheritance tax as a cliff edge from the 2nd of April 2025, plus a 10-year hold on non-doms that left the UK afterwards. Again, that was acting as a big push factor, and also a disincentive of non-doms, new non-doms that went to the UK. It's those issues that are playing the most concern. So any sort of relaxation around inheritance tax goes some way.
Thank you, thank you. Let us turn to Nadim Zahawi, who of course Chancellor of the Exchequer, Conservative MP, is no longer either of those things. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And from your perspective now, do you think if they go back to the hump plans, essentially, that would be wise and that would be sensible?
Well, I think the team at the Treasury are pretty smart people, and when you look at all the options, and I think Rachel's right to look at this, I'll tell you for why, because when economists like Andy Halman say that this will impact growth in our country, then we should listen. I was told over the summer that in July alone, in British applications for residency in a place like Monaco was 5,000. So there's about 80,000 non-doms in the UK that contribute £8.5 billion. I actually went to Rishi at the time and said, look, I think we should abolish the non-dom status. So by the way, after being Chancellor, I was out of government completely. But I thought we should replace it with what the Italians were doing, which is they were effectively attracting investment from international investors, with the residents, we should call it an enterprise residence. They were charging €100,000 per adult per household, and the loan is just increased to €200,000. I thought, the UK is much more attractive. We could charge £250,000.
Does that have any traction in the country? That sort of argument?
Look, the team is a very clever team. My own team are brilliant people. They should look at all of this. And I think, look, ultimately, there are countries now, look at the man who owns Aston Villa, Severus has moved his family office to Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi's got a whole concierge team that now are hand-holding wealthy investors to bring them to the country. And so we've got to just be more competitive about these things and be realistic.
Can we not say that, hang on a second, London's just a great place to live for all sorts of reasons, and we ought to be able to say that, and if people were to choose not to, then they're welcome not to, but we've got our extraordinary rule of law, our court system, the safety, the stability of this country, and if people want to make the choice to come here and pay a bit more tax, then that's good, and if they decide not to, that's good enough.
I don't disagree with you. I think you mentioned safety, and I think London and City Car need to get better at making sure the roads are safe, the streets are safe. But anyway, that aside, I think they can do a couple of things that will make a huge difference to the economy. One, I've always been advocating through the Adam Smith Institute that we should abolish an unfair tax, inheritance tax, for all people, because it stops investment. Entrepreneurs sell their businesses early in the UK, even if they're not considering in the UK because of inheritance tax. And actually, we mean a lot of international investors will look at holding UK assets, which means growth, means jobs, and I would look at one other thing, which is the definition of residency. Most countries, including the United States, the definition is 180 days. In the UK, it starts off at 45 days and rises to about 120, then drops back to 90. I think if they do that, then it will actually make us incredibly attractive for investment, and we'll begin to deliver the growth story.
And just to be clear, those are the amount of days that you spend in the country without being tax resident.
Before you define tax resident.
Vadim Zahawi, thank you very much. And our questions.
It is 18 minutes late.
Now, let us turn to matters very far away from our own personal experience, I suppose, of life, and indeed very far away from the way in which people in the corridors of power see the various crises that the world is focusing on. As we focus on Ukraine, we focus on the Middle East, there is a conflict that's causing untold human misery and gets very little traction in the corridors of power. The BBC has been on a rare trip to Omdurman, part of Sudan's capital and one of the battlefields in the country's civil war that pits the leaders of the Sudanese army against the paramilitary RSF group. They control different parts of the country. They're both accused of war crimes and obstructing aid. And now the army has been pushing the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, as they call it, against a part of Khartoum which they want to take back. Civilians are suffering. They suffer from regular shelling. Those living in the RSF-held areas have described lives of almost unbearable hardship. Our Africa correspondent, Barbara Pletasche, is in Port Sudan.
Yes, I spent much of the past week with the military in Omdurman, which is across the Nile River from Khartoum. The army pushed the RSF out of most of Omdurman in fierce battles several months ago, and large parts of the city feel almost apocalyptic. The buildings are torched or bombed, they're covered in bullet holes, but the RSF still controls pockets of territory there, and I was brought to one of those front lines. Now the military has launched a surprise attack, a new major operation to try and take back Khartoum, so it's really on the offensive. But we also saw the impact on civilians, people wounded by intermittent shelling, and especially we got insight into a really dark aspect of the conflict, the widespread sexual violence blamed mostly on the RSF. I'm on the outskirts of Omdurman at a transit point for people who are coming out of RSF-held territory into an area that is controlled by the army. Some of them are walking, some of them are coming on donkey carts, some of them are fleeing permanently to a safer area. Others are crossing the line so that they can go to a market and buy goods more cheaply and then go back to their homes. And we have been hearing horrific stories about what life is like under the RSF. So what was it like coming here? What was your journey like? Very difficult, these women tell me. At every RSF checkpoint we had to pay, they say. They walk for 4 hours to buy food. Their husbands can't leave the house for fear of being beaten or detained.
What about the women? Are the women safe or unsafe?
The chorus of voices died down until one woman burst out.
There are so many women here who've been raped, but they don't talk about it. What difference would it make anyway? Some girls, the RSF makes them lie in the streets at night. If they come back late from this market, the RSF keeps them for 5 or 6 days.
As she spoke, her mother sat with head in hand, sobbing. Other women around her also started crying.
You in your world, if your child went out, would you leave her? Wouldn't you go look for her? What can we do? Nothing is in our hands. No one cares for us. We are cut off.
I asked them why they didn't leave. We're too poor, they told me. We have nowhere else to go. The capital is still an active war zone. In Omdurman, we were escorted at all times by the army. We're traveling at quite a speed because there's been shelling this morning, and we heard a mortar strike land what seemed quite close to us just a few minutes ago. So the military is telling us we have to travel quickly in order to avoid any chance of getting hit by artillery fire. It's the shelling that's claiming many civilian lives. Casualties are brought here to El Nau, the largest emergency hospital. In the past week, it's received dozens.
One of them is this person, hit by shrapnel in the neck.
The head doctor, Jamal Al-Tayeb, is leaning over the bed of 15-year-old Sufian Shawish. The boy was working at a market when a mortar landed close by.
The bomb hit the wall in front of me. My friend screamed for help. They put me in a minibus. There was blood coming out of my nose and mouth.
He's now paralyzed from the neck down. Sufian's mother, Miriam Sanusi, had asked him to leave the market shortly before the attack.
He's got his whole life ahead of him. He's still a young man. And to be hit like this, to become paralysed, it's very hard to bear. I hope that people will help my son. I don't have money for the operation.
But it's sexual violence that's become a defining characteristic of the conflict. Both sides are accused of war crimes, but the RSF more so than the army, especially when it comes to rape. They deny the charges. One woman tells us her own story. She now works at a tea stall in the market at the transit point. But at the beginning of the war, she says, armed men broke into her house demanding to rape her 2 daughters. The youngest was 10 years old. We've chosen to protect her identity for her safety.
I told the girls to stay behind me, and I said to the RSF, if you want to rape anyone, it has to be me. They hit me and told me to take off my clothes. And before I took them off, I told my girls to leave, and they jumped over the fence. Then one of the men laid on me.
The other women we met are gathering now to begin the trek back home. For as long as this war goes on, they have no choice but to return to its horrors.
That's Barbara Pletasha reporting from Port Sudan. It is 11 minutes to 8 now, and our thought for the day's speaker is Catherine Peppenster, the Catholic commentator. Morning, Catherine.
Good morning, Michelle. In the past week, I've spent my time doing what I thought at first were very disparate things. Visiting 2 art exhibitions, one of Van Gogh and the other of Lowry, talking to survivors of historic sexual abuse by Catholic priests, and reading news reports of people fleeing from attacks in Lebanon. But now, looking back, I realise there's a thread running through them. They're all about being witnesses. Van Gogh, like Lowry, depicted the world he watched, but the two painters also used their work to witness to their own emotions, including torment and loneliness. The people I spoke to described their own experience of abuse and also what they'd seen, while in the journalist news report, people spoke of the fear of being caught up in conflict as Lebanon is bombed. It made me realise that being a witness, speaking out in all sorts of ways, is integral to the human condition. Among the witnesses to one of the most significant moments in human history were those at the foot of the cross, who did not run away when Jesus was taken prisoner by the Romans, was scourged, made to carry his cross, and then crucified. Being there in solidarity mattered, but telling others of the crucifixion was essential to the spread of early Christianity. One of the most beautiful African American spirituals was waved there when they crucified my Lord. But what if your answer was no? I turned away. I could have been there and said something, but I stayed silent. In the past week, reports about Mohammed Al-Fayed and his attacks on women have been deeply disturbing. But now the reporting is moving on to focus on the enablers of Al-Fayed. Some of them, it's alleged, facilitated his abuse, including doctors carrying out intimate examinations of the victims and security personnel who allegedly threatened women not to speak out about what happened to them. Others appeared to know his interest in young women, but said nothing. Perhaps some of them lived in fear of speaking out, but perhaps others thought keeping quiet was an easier option. When I talk to survivors of abuse, as I did last week, as part of my reporting on historic sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, I've come to realise that their anger and distress over the cover-ups of what happened